Welcome to the seminar on critical, oh sorry, that's the wrong slide, on critical reflection. And my name is Eva Kavková, and you already met me in the main session, and I'm really pleased to welcome here my colleague Siobhan Neary, who's the director or the head. What's the correct title?
Oh, head of the
head of the International Center for Guidance Studies from Derby University. So what shall we have about 1 hour, and what shall we talk about here today? Is sorry, it's not working. Okay. So we're going to introduce you the critical reflection because it is something which is not so widespread in career guidance. It's a tool which is used a lot in social services or social work, in psychology or psychotherapy, but not that much in career guidance. And we think it's a pity. And we shall explain you why we need critical reflection in our practice. Then we shall talk about, okay, if I want to start with critical reflection, so where do I start? How do I do it? What's the starting point of it? And then we shall introduce you one tool which we think is really useful when you want to start with critical reflection, and it's the PCS analysis, which means personal, cultural, and structural analysis, which was created by Thompson. And it was created for social work, but we think that it's very much close to what we're doing. So it's something that you can use in your practice. And it's based on anti-discriminatory approach, but Siobhan will explain you more about it later on. And then, and we think this is really important. So we don't want to present only some nice theories, but we want to dedicate this workshop also to talking about how we can apply this model into our daily practice. And I'm going to be running the presentation, so you have to tell me each time I have to click, yeah? So Siobhan will explain you more about what is critical reflection.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome. We're really pleased that A, you've joined us, and B, that we're able to run this session. We first ran a very similar session at the IEVG conference a couple of years ago, and I think we were both overwhelmed with how much interest there was in this topic area, and it's something myself and Eva try every now and again and do something on, but we run out of time to do something that is substantive. So hopefully we might have some motivation. I think what I want to start talking about really is that, you know, for many of us, when we do our training as career practitioners, we do spend quite a lot of time exploring reflective practice, and we're trained to in a range of methods, whether it's shown, sort of reflection in action and reflection on action, possibly the Gibbs model or John's model. There's a whole range of them there. But we focus very much on ourselves and the interactions, and at the most deficit level, we often only focus on the activities when they go wrong. And I think what's really important for me, and a lot of the research that I've been involved with, is that reflective practice and experiential learning is probably one of the most productive and important aspects and elements of our practice, both in developing and growing our skills and our experience and our expertise as practitioners, but also as a critical engagement in what we do. And I think that we spend a lot of our training or CPD thinking very much about reflection and less about sort of higher order reflective activities such as reflexivity, where we're exploring more about our relationships and how we impact and our behaviours can impact on others. And Thompson as Ava's already said, has written quite a lot about this. I'm going to talk to you about this in a short while. But he criticises a lot of the sort of formal training around reflection as it's training as focusing for a pause for thought. And that's not to say that, you know, thinking about what we're doing is not valued, but it's what we want to talk to you about today is moving all of this to a next level, to thinking in more depth about our critique of our practice and our recognition of our place in what we're doing. So I think one of the things we want to look at is work with you to raise an awareness of how the social and political context that we work in impact on how we practice, and that we need to be able to challenge some of the fundamental assumptions around the work that we do, and that we need to perhaps move our way of thinking to a new lens and seeing the world through the influences that impact on our practice and our thinking, and particularly when it's thinking about oppression and discrimination in the work that we do. So if we move on to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So just a little bit of background. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this, but critical reflection and this particular area of work that Thompson talks about is very located in social work, but it draws from a whole range of theoretical perspectives. So it builds on reflective practice, reflexivity, but it is very much around challenging, sort of from a postmodernist perspective, around sort of the values and the cultural construction that we all work in. So it's really challenging what we see around us, what we're being told, and where those sort of drivers come from. But looking at the work that Fuka's done, you know, she works with us to think about improving our professional practice and focusing on the power of assumption, and particularly thinking about the order in which we work and the structures that we're working in as professionals. And I think we can all agree that is becoming more and more dominant, and perhaps our autonomy as careers professionals is becoming less and less year by year. So what I want to do now is I'd like you just for a few minutes, I've said a little bit about critical reflection. I'd just like you to think about what might be the limitations for your practice about not thinking critically about what you do. How might it impact on how you work with your clients, your customers, and what might be the impact of that? So if you want to just write a few thoughts in the chat, that would be really good. So if you think about your practice and thinking about what the limitations might be for you if not thinking critically, reflectively about the work. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to write a few things in there. And just as you're
to jump out of this full screen view so we can see the chat.
Okay.
I think.
Just the last point.
You can use the microphone as well, because it's not muted anymore. We're not in the main session. So feel free to say it also and just talk to us.
Okay.
If you feel like.
So if anybody wants to raise their hand, you've got a little
okay.
icon on the bottom of the panel.
Someone says limitations, missed opportunities for both client and practitioner. Okay, and
we've got a raised hand. Ilsa, would you like to?
Yes, I just wanted to invite Eva to stop sharing her screen, because then we can see everybody better.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, generation gap. I'm quite older than my students. I think real limitation is pressure on time. Resources are always limited, and this puts practitioners under pressure.
I think that's true, Jane. And I think one of the big issues, and I would say this probably for the UK, and our colleague Jenny Bimrose has written extensively about this over the years, is that reflective practice isn't valued in the workplace particularly, and not always by practitioners either, not just by managers, but it does need to have a much higher profile in terms of how it supports the development of practice generally. And, you know, as we're going to talk more about critical reflection and how that can support and build on practice. Any other thoughts or hands?
We're speaking about the question of power, about our assumption, how I treat my clients, maybe about prejudices. So how does this impact my practice? I noticed to get stuck too easily to some format, especially online, not always truly listening to the participant and trying new. Okay.
Yes, I think that's a really important point again. And I think that is why reflective practice is so important. It's so easy to just get stuck in, you know, there's a model, the conscious competence model, and I often use that when I do this sort of workshop, and we have time today to go into that. But it is very much about, and I've seen it so many times with practitioners almost having a script that they go through, and they'll ask the same questions in the same order. You know, they will say what they have to say in terms of contract compliance, perhaps around the funders, rather than contextualizing and listening and hearing the client, you know, what the messaging is coming from the client and what the client's communicating that they're not saying. And I think that's a really important point.
Okay, yeah, this is important. Yeah, for Maria, I might miss to give important information because I take for granted that the client already knows and have a similar background as mine. Absolutely, you nailed it.
That is absolutely exactly what we're looking at today, and that recognition of the assumptions we make. I think the first thing I tell all my students when they start their training is never make assumptions about anything. Because you will always be wrong. And one of the real skills of guidance is the open-mindedness and treating every person in front of you as a unique individual.
My primary degree was in literary and cultural studies, which was heavy on critical analysis for you.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I think I have to move us on because time's running fast. So thanks for your thoughts, and we'll come back to this later on during the workshop, and I will switch to the presentation again. All right?
Yeah, so just to summarize some of those key points there is very much around issues of potentially impartiality, around assumptions, and these have all come up, which is brilliant. Not being able to understand, and I think empathy, understanding where the client is coming from. So one of the things, sorry, I'm just shutting down my chat now because it's right in the middle of my screen. So critical reflection, again, I think it's a way of being. I think there is an existential element to this as well, in thinking about the oppression and discrimination, you know, that we're observing throughout our lives, and not just what we see on the 9 to 5 in terms of our work. So if we move on to the next slides, we've got two more slides, and then I will hand over to my lovely colleague.
Okay.
So just a few points here I just want to talk through. Many of you will be familiar with the work of Siobhan, and I do think it's an important starting point for all of us in recognizing and understanding what reflection is, why it's important, and that relationship between theory and practice, but how practice can inform new theory, and how our practice needs to be and should be continuing to develop throughout our professional working lives. I've already mentioned around some of the challenges, particularly around for managerialist agendas and neoliberal agendas for where we're working, and how work is becoming more automated. And I don't necessarily mean that in terms of digital, but being constrained by what is perceived as being outcome focused activities, So the use of metrics, the use of targets and KPIs, those sorts of things. Payment by results is a big thing in the UK, particularly in England with our National Career Service. So reflection, therefore, is an important part in being able to have transformative practice. And again, we talk a lot about power within this, and it is very much about power relationships. So the definition that I've used is a Weberian one in terms of exercising one's will over others. So just moving on to the next slide. And many of you will be very familiar with the work that my colleague Tristram Hooley, Ronald Sultana and Ray Thompson have been engaged with over the last couple of years around social justice. They've written two absolutely amazing seminal books. And I think what's been really pertinent for me about all of that has been this spotlight on social injustice and the connection and the interrelationship of career guidance with social injustice, and that this is something we need to spend a lot more time thinking about and understanding. And I think critical reflection gives us some of the tools to start engaging in higher level conversations and to start thinking and understanding about how social injustice might be impacting, influencing our work. So career guidance seeks a very pluralistic engagement, and values, again, is one of the things we spend a lot of time thinking about and recognising the diversity of the clients and also the other practitioners that we work with, the stakeholders we work with as well. So I do think there is an interesting debate to have. We're having the time here about the individualistic nature of career guidance, and that Western approach may be actually inhibiting how we're dealing with a lot of the clients that we might have in terms of being able to fully understand the cultural barriers that they might have, the structural barriers they might have. And going back to some of the points in the chat earlier around our making assumptions that people have got a similar viewpoint, a similar perspective, they've had a similar set of experience to us. So we need to think about, you know, how do the constraints in which we work limit our ability and our confidence, but also we need to think about how that raises our awareness and understanding of those drivers and challenges that are influencing and impacting on the work that we do. And how do we articulate and recognise that as practitioners, the various power dynamics that we're working with and we're involved with. So I'm going to hand over to Eva now, who's going to take us through the next session.
Thank you, Siobhan. So this was, let's say, some introduction. So we all know where we come from, what ideas or what terms we're using and what approaches. And now we'll move into more like practical part of the workshop, where we shall speak about the concrete impacts on our work and where to start and how to do it. So the first question, where do I start? Or what are the ways to employ critical reflection? Sorry, it's stuck somehow. Okay, so I can start either with myself. So it's a critical reflection which is directed on me personally. And it is something which is quite normal to do in, let's say, social work or psychotherapy, that we examine ourselves, yeah, our practice, our beliefs, our ideas, our approach to our clients. We look back on how the session has been with my clients. What have I thought in the beginning? How did I treat him? Was I happy with the results or not? And how should I change my practice in the future? And the other approach I might take is directed outwards. So I'm examining my environment and how it influences me and my relationship with my clients. So this is something that Siobhan was just mentioning. And the model that Fiona Douglas is using is that you can either focus on your activity, which is the interaction between your client and you're examining your skills, or you can focus on your context on your micro environment, which means that you look on what is my the structure of the organization I'm working for, what is the culture, or what is the service model, how do I treat my clients, do they have to meet me in my office, are there any barriers when they want to approach me, or do I do some outreach work, and is there some push from let's say my superiors, what should I do and what I shouldn't do with my clients, what should be my results and what shouldn't be, are there some restraints or not, or am I utterly free to do whatever I would love to, what I think it's important or not. So this plays quite a crucial role, and it has an impact on our clients, and it can even deepen the social injustice, or it can help them. And very often we just don't have time to really stop and think about, okay, so what is the environment I'm working in? Is it beneficial for the clients or not? And the other level is that I focus on the macro environment, which means I focus on, let's say, the policy towards career guidance, what kind of framework is it located in, what's the social context and economic or technological influences. Just to give you some examples from our practice, well, for example, lots of our work with marginalized people is funded by the European Social Fund. And it's very much linked to delivering certain results, so-called indicators. If you don't deliver those indicators, then you're stripped of maybe even half the funding, which is really a lot of money, so you just cannot afford it. And it just pushes you into, let's say, choosing not so problematic clients, so it's easy to deliver the results that you're expected to have. Yeah, because if you're working with really marginalized people, you might not have any results in 1 year, 2 years, and even the results, so-called results, are quite questionable. Yeah, so is it really beneficial that everybody finds work? Is it okay that somebody's just doing what he or she is happy in her life, and I just let them be and let them do what they want? But I'm really pushed by the funding to deliver certain results, and it forces me to really choose which clients I'm able to help and which not. And I'm going to ask you, Siobhan, if you can share some example from your practice about those influences on our daily practice.
Yeah, particularly that last one, I think you've hit the nail on the head. That there's a horrible term that's used, which is low-hanging fruit, and that because of the restrictions in the funding, and ironically, often the funding is meant to be focused on helping those at the furthest from the labour market to get back to work in terms of the welfare to work agenda, particularly for career guidance. Because there isn't enough resource to actually do that in-depth long-term work, the organisations focus very much on those that are easiest to work with. So we do still end up with very, very disenfranchised groups because the model of funding does not allow that. I think one of the examples that I think is really interesting is that in the UK, in terms of the public employment service contracts, for example, a provider that has much lower qualified career employability staff will get paid a lot more for moving somebody into work than somebody who's a qualified careers practitioner, who will have actually spent time supporting somebody to engage and to develop in terms of their practice. So I do think that there's major issues, and interestingly, it's a lot of these what are called nudge effects, where they put the systems in place to move you to behaving in certain ways, but actually, unfortunately, often it's counterintuitive and it doesn't work the way we would expect it to. So I think we've got increasingly a lot of challenges. I think we've got lots of examples around government policy. In the last couple of years, we've been a real push around apprenticeships, around technical and vocational education. Prior to that, it was around higher education. and widening access and encouraging young people who whose families had no experience of HE and university to go to university. And the narrative was for 20 years, you know, if you don't go to university, your life's over, you've failed. And a lot of young people, a lot of families have lived that and felt that was real. And now the narrative's shifted again, which is gone the other way. And it's saying, oh, no, you don't want to go to university, it costs you loads of money, you want to do an apprenticeship, that's what you want to do. And because of the nature of the funding, these are the messages that practitioners in schools and you know, national services are articulating, because that's the latest agenda. So I think there's something really interesting in how we as public funded practitioners challenge these sorts of state narratives based on the policy that government is currently wanting to encourage. And this is where it gets us back to this individualistic thought process about the work that we work with our clients. So there's quite a lot of issues there, I think, Eva, that I'm sure all of our colleagues on this session could also add to.
Yeah, I think we have some space, so I would like to encourage you to share some examples of what is, for example, the policy in your country, or what are you, let's say, coerced to promote, what kind of issues or results, or do you feel any pressures on yourselves? So I go to chat again.
I can share a thought.
Thank you.
I work in Finland. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
And in Finland, we also have good programs for the employment offices. And that's very good and helpful for us guidance also, because then we can sometimes find the good reasons that, okay, this person is not able to work, for example, full-time or not at all at the moment. So they will need supported work programs also, and they are given us by government, and that's very helpful, because then we don't have to fight to get the results, because the result can also be to guide them to supported work program or supported group for trying to apply to school. But these all, of course, these persons it's good that they come to guidance, so we can together see the capability of the person.
Thank you.
So that's very helpful.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna read this from the chat. Even within our single institution perspective, we are encouraged to focus our efforts on groups based on proximity to the labor market, like final year students as a priority, and based on metrics about how likely their subject is to achieve professional level jobs. This may lead us to where the help is needed, but if the help isn't welcomed, it can still be wasted, and worse, by choosing we have then neglected the others. Maybe not low-hanging fruit, but perhaps the people in the middle who are neither hard to help, not readily able to help themselves. The government vision of low-value subject is definitely pushing this.
Yeah, I agree with that, Alexandra. I think that's absolutely bang on. And I think because we've got constrained resources and because of the targets, I think we're increasingly focusing on those that are easiest to help. And I think, you know, as you said there, that the metrics, particularly in England, the metrics are killing everything that we do. They're killing our creativity and our innovative practices because there's no space. There's so little space to do anything that is new. It's very challenging.
Okay, we have one more message from Ilse. I agree with our Finnish colleague. Personally, I think my primary responsibility as a practitioner is to observe ethical practice. If a client is not ready for career guidance due to social or personal issues, they can be referred to more appropriate services. Actually, I found a report from Greece highlighting some innovative approach which has been tested even during the Greek financial crisis. And they're saying about mixing the services together. So it's not just career guidance, but also close cooperation with health workers, social workers, and psychological service. I think especially in the times of crisis, we need this kind of blended approach and really close collaboration. So this might be some good outcome from the pandemic.
That's happened. Yeah, there was a big project similar to that in England, probably about 15 years ago. And careers practitioners were linked to medical practices, and doctors could refer patients for career guidance to look at what other things they could do. Actually, one of the outcomes of that was lower dependency on prescription drugs, pain management, whole well-being in particular was really influenced in that. And I think there is some of that developing again at the moment with National Career Service. There's some interesting work, but it's finding opportunities to capture it and to disseminate it, I think is one of the challenges that we need to work on. But I think they're really excellent types of examples. Yeah.
Thanks for your comments and examples, and I think that we'll come back to this once we start speaking about Thompson analysis, because the last level touches this very much. So Siobhan, I will start the presentation once again, and I will hand it over to you, right? Because now we're moving to Neil Thompson's model, how to examine the levels of oppression or the powers that play a role in career guidance.
Do you want to just skip on to the next slide, actually?
Okay, I will.
Go into it in more detail on the next one.
Okay.
So, rather than... Okay, so as we've already said, one of the models that we're really interested in is the work of Neil Thompson, who is actually has particularly done work on social work. But a lot of his early writing is very much around empowering practitioners to think much more about the relationship in their practice with reflections and critical thinking, but also to relocate that client practitioner relationship. Because if we think about, for many of us, we've been trained in a very Rogerian way. We've been trained to use counselling skills, and very much that interaction on a one-to-one basis. But as we've already acknowledged and recognised, that we might often make assumptions about the clients in front of us, both positively and negatively. We may not be always asking the right questions and challenging, little c challenging there. But what he does is he links together the personal experience of the individual and the belief, so that the three levels that he looks at are what is personal and psychological, which very much focuses on the individual's belief systems, and this can include prejudice, bias, race, gender, all of those things. And when I've been working through this, it brought in mind a young man that I was interviewing many years ago who wanted a job in travel, really interested. And when we started talking about working in cabin crew and working on airlines, he just totally defensive. Oh, that's full of gay men. I don't want to work in that. Why would I work in that? And we ended up spending a lot of time actually focusing then and trying to unpick some of his issues and his prejudice. But we've all got our own personal views, our own personal belief systems. We all have prejudices regardless of who we are, and it's the extent to which we allow those to influence and impact on our practice that defines us as a professional. And often then we might not even think about it. So we've talked about examples of with practitioners in schools, and because those young people's options are maybe quite limited because of the context they live in, the social economic deprivation, then practitioners might not bother talking about higher level jobs or higher level opportunities, because they've seen that the majority of those kids will go into quite traditional work of mechanics, motor mechanics, or nursery nursing, or retail work, and very much connected to those who are familiar with Ken Roberts' work around opportunity structure and what's available. So those individual belief systems that we have and our clients have influence how we look at the opportunities that will be available to us. So if we move on to the next one, which is the cultural level. Within the cultural level, this is the community approaches, and this may be linked to the types of jobs you can do or you can't do. Kids in this area don't go to university. Kids in this area, go and work in the large factory or whatever. And I think what's really important about that is that those views become normality. They become local truths. And the challenge for us in how do we, combat some of those, it could be, that within certain communities, and Gideon talks about this, Gideon Al-Romani and his work with the Jiva Foundation. Every parent wants their child to be a brain surgeon. Nobody wants their child to be a plumber. But on a day-to-day basis, we need plumbers. We don't need brain surgeons. So it's exploring how individual views are influenced by the wider cultural shared values that communities may have and may promote. And then if we go on to the last one, what Thompson talks about here is around structural levels. And within this is actually perhaps even more insidious. This is the reinforcement of views by society through media, through government policy. And, we have seen so much of this over the last few years with Trump, with post-truth, in the UK, we've recently had a report around sort of systemic racism in society, which has been absolutely trashed because the messaging did not relate to what people's experiences were. So what Thompson presents in his work is this interrelationship of these three elements: the individual view, the community and societal view, and then the structural view, how that is reinforced, and those connections together can limit and can promote there's a social injustice, oppression, discrimination. So as a critical reflective practitioner, we need to be able to think about and understand each of these elements and how they help us to see the individual in front of us as an individual and what might have contributed to their views and their beliefs about their opportunities and what's available to them. So I'll pass back to Eva now.
Okay, so this is the model, and we already talked about some impacts of the model to our daily lives. Now we want to present you some easy questions dedicated to each of those three levels, which is good to ask ourselves and to really examine, to critically examine what are my values or what is my attitude, because not everywhere in certain jobs or in certain countries, once you want to work with people, you have to undergo some training where you really examine your values, your personality, how you're treating other people. And I remember I've been on a 1-week training in the UK in Southampton, which was focused on racism. And if I'm racist or not, and how do I treat people who have, let's say, different color of the skin. And this is an essential part of social workers training in the UK, but maybe not somewhere else. So I think it's really important that we bring these qualitative issues into the career counseling, and we really develop some framework which will help us to really examine ourselves and our practice, so we could really treat our clients or people who work with without any bias. And it's really difficult because we're constructed to really work this way, because this is the way how to handle too many informations. So it's easy for me to create some patterns and use them every time I meet somebody who I think they just clicks into the box. So, okay, this person is from such and such environment, I'm sure he's gonna behave like this. And it's really difficult, and it needs a lot of effort not to treat them, to really be aware of this, the ways that our brain is functioning and really treat them indifferently, and it's really difficult. So if we're moving to the personal space, what is important? What do I start? What kind of questions do I ask myself? It can be, for example, look into the jobs my parents and grandparents have. So what is considered to be a good job in my family? Because quite often I've been hearing stories about, oh, this is really shitty work, and yeah, all the doctors are really excellent. I think you should be a doctor one day, you know. And we keep hearing that from our very childhood, and it influences us how we treat certain jobs or possibilities, and what we think is a good work or good job, and what we think is not a good work, good job. And what were the expectations, for example, from my own career? Yeah. So what do my parents and my grandparents told me when I was growing up? Did I really have a free choice, or were they pushing me into some direction and giving me over some values related to job and employment, which I might even not be aware of? And it's not just about work, but what do I consider a suitable study career or award-winning career, or what is a good job and good job opportunity? I think this is really important, especially when I'm working with students at school. And I keep hearing it many times from the teachers. They say, well, you know, if he's gonna study some arts, well, there's so many unemployed people, you know, who study this kind of university, and there's really lack of like technical workers, and I think his brain is not really good for this kind of studies, and he should really go to some vocational schools, and it's gonna be easy for him to find a job. So they don't mean it really bad, and they're really concerned for their clients or students, but they just don't give them this free choice. And I think that sometimes it's important to let our clients just to make a mistake and learn from the mistake. Yeah, I'm not the one who's responsible for the careers of the others. My role is to broaden their opportunities and give them as many possibilities as possible. But what we're noticing is very often the teachers are behaving or taking the role of a parent, you know, and really they are concerned that, okay, if I just let them to go to university, they might one day feel unemployed, or they might not even finish the school, and how they're going to find a job. It's not my problem, you know, it's the problem of my client, and I should believe that he's capable enough just to cope with his or her life. And there's also a question of my values and how they influence my work. And this is also an issue which we don't have much time really to stop and think what my values are, and values linked to work or my life values. And it's really good to take a step back and think about it, because it really plays a huge role in our life. And Siobhan already mentioned the prejudices. So it's also good to examine what is my previous, let's say, experience with other people. And do I have any assumptions when I meet somebody from certain cultural background? So do I expect already that he's gonna have such and such experience or demands? And do I treat him really indifferently or not? Because very often, if we have one bad experience with a certain person, then we tend to bring it with ourselves, and then we project it to the whole group. So what I want you to do at this point, so it's not only me talking all the time, I want you to stop and think a bit. And I would ask you to draw your family tree and think of your parents and grandparents, and maybe if you have brothers or sisters, and try to write down what kind of jobs they have. So what does it tell you about your family? Yeah. For example, if I draw my family tree, there will be all of those people would have a university education, which created an environment where it was not possible to finish my study after the secondary school. It was just impossible, and everybody just had to go to to university. And I even remember the story my grandmother told me, that if I should marry one day, I should marry somebody who has a university degree as well, because otherwise my marriage won't be functioning. So this is another environment I've been brought up in, and I'm aware of certain prejudices I had when I started to work against people who didn't have a university degree, you know. And I thought, okay, all those with those diplomas, they are the clever ones, and the others who don't are just not those who are successful. And that took me many years to change this attitude, because it's been something I've been hearing from my, well, very early childhood. Yeah, and I've been surrounded by just people who have university degrees. So try to stop and draw your family tree and look at it. What does it say? What kind of job or education does it appear there? Can you see any pattern there? Or is it really random and everybody was doing something else? And try to think of the stories you've been told by your parents and grandparents when you were growing up concerning your career and job. So what did they tell you? Were you utterly free to go study what you want and do what you want? Or did they push you? Okay, I have to move on. I don't have much time. So the next is the cultural level. And as Siobhan said, this is about our social circles that we move in. So it means, for example, I can examine when I was studying, so what are my classmates? What were their ideas about jobs and educations, and what were their values? And who are my colleagues? Who are the people I'm surrounded with in my work? What are their ideas and beliefs? Yeah, and which community I'm moving in, and what are the values of my community? And the key question is here: what is my idea, influenced by the circles I'm moving in, about the normal life? Yeah, which means like what kind of studies should I have? What kind of job I should do? Is there any pressure from the circles I'm moving in to choose a certain career path? Or again, am I really free to choose whatever I want? Yeah. And how would I describe my own culture? And when we were preparing this workshop with Siobhan, we were thinking that, well, our culture is like a middle-aged white woman with a university degree. So can you tell us, Siobhan, so what your own culture would be? What's the norm for your social group? Siobhan, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, sorry. Oh, God, I think that's such an interesting question. Yes, I mean, one of the things I'm really interested in is around the homogeneity of career practitioners, and that, you know, we all look alike, and how does that impact on our world, and our social lives often reflect the type of people we're aware, you know, of similar education as us, or work in similar ways, and where we live, and all of those things. And one thing that I do think is really interesting, many years ago, I worked in a factory as a student job, and I hated it. I hated it so much, and I'd stand there all day on an assembly line thinking, how do people do this? How do people do this every day? And at the end of it, I ended up writing about it for my undergraduate dissertation about women on factory assembly lines. Because what I discovered, and I think this has highly influenced my practice, is that just because I thought it was boring didn't mean that other people did. A lot of the women I was working with, it was independence, it was social life, it was finance. For them, they loved what they did. It got them out of the house, it got them away from their husbands and their kids and all sorts of stuff. And for me, that was a real learning point, that I had my own culture. I come from a very working class background, you know, so I didn't know anyone who'd been to university, and that's a whole different other story. And you know, I do think it is quite important, and then we track how our lives have changed. So it's not just those initial ones, but also how our lives evolve, and the impacts and influences on that.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll move on with my questions. Sorry. Yeah. And it's good to think, as we just mentioned it, so our cultural perspective, which is woman, middle-aged, white, university, how does it change from other cultures? And this was a really nice example from Siobhan. So somebody might find some work really boring and uninspiring, and from a different perspective, it can appear as something utterly different. So we just judge from our point of view, which is different from other people. And it's also important how I treat people from different cultures with different set of values and different ideas how to live their life. And again, a small example. For example, I consider myself a feminist, and I think it's really important to have my own income, my work, which is even my hobby. And it's sometimes difficult to distinguish between my free time or myself and my work. And I have a client who's, let's say, a woman from a rural background, and her idea of a good life is to stay home with kids. I might maybe try to push her, like, and you should really think of your financial independence, and be good for you to have a job. And it might be difficult, or certainly has been when I started as a career counselor or practitioner. Really not to judge her and not to insert my values or project them into my work and the way I was treating her. Because, okay, this is what she wants, this makes her happy, it's not my life, it's her. But I was really struggling internally just to let it go. So I think this is really important, and this is quite obvious. And there might be some subtle pressures on our practice which we might not even be aware of. And it's really good to examine our idea of normalcy and normality, and how it's been influenced by the circles we moved in, and how do I project this into my work with my clients. So my question for you is, if you could think of the different circles you were moving in, and some of you already mentioned it in the chat, during your life, and if you could think of the influence they had on you and on your idea of, let's say, normal life or normality, means normal, what kind of life I want to, what kind of family I want to have, what kind of work do I want to work or not, do I want to study, what do I want to study. So how has this been influenced by the circle I was moving in, and by the people I'm surrounded by? Because not only our family plays a crucial role in this, but also our friends, colleagues, and people we're meeting. So try to think about the major influences on your set of values. And I think that this pressure of normality, it's kind of a control that the community exerts over people. They should just fit into the norms, and they should behave like everybody else. Yeah. And if they want to do something else, this is really not normal, and you shouldn't be doing this. So sometimes we're competing with those pressures from the community that our clients come from. Yeah. And it's really difficult to really find out what's the pressure of the family, what's the pressure of the community, what's the real wish of the client, and what's my wish, or what's my idea for an ideal job or career or study for my client. It's like a competition on different levels. It's really difficult to handle it. So my question for you, we're running late. Okay, and I'm moving to the last level, which is the structure level, and we've already been discussing it a bit. And these are the questions of the wider environment, the pressure from the governments, the influence of media or politics. And the first question you can ask yourself, where the funding for my work comes from, and what conditions are linked to this funding, and what does it really pushes me to do, and am I really free or not? How do I treat my clients because of the funding? And what results am I expected to deliver? This doesn't have to be related directly to the funding, but it may be linked to the my organization and the service model I'm using or working in, and my organizational culture and my superiors. So am I expected to have certain results? And what's the time frame for delivering these results? Because time is also of a great importance, especially when you're working in a project, and then your time is really limited. And it's also good to think about, to stop and think about let's say the general mood in your country. Yeah, so let's say what's the governmental policy towards schools, primary education, secondary education? Is there any push towards let's say, oh, we don't have many students in vocational schools, so let's push the students when they decide what to do, let's push them into vet schools, because then we don't have enough workers in the factories. And if we've been experiencing a great pressure from the big companies, from the big industries, to really push primary school students into vet schools, because there's a lack of workers. And also, in what way do the media report, let's say, on unemployed people, on education? What kind of words they are choosing? What's the general mood, or what's the narrative which is used in my country? Because this is something which is influencing us as well, and sometimes quite unconsciously. And my question for you is the pressures, and I already asked the question about the results and the funding, and how does this influence your work? Are you free or not? And if you're not free, what can you do to help your clients the best way you could, even if the conditions are really restricted and it's really difficult sometimes? So this is just a really short introduction into critical reflection and how to use it in practice. And if you want to find out more, then there will be many, like 5 or 6 articles on critical reflection in the publication, which we will launch later today. So you can learn more about some other models. You can learn about how this influences the work of care practitioners in schools, and what can you do as a practitioner to be aware of those influences and really act in the best interest of your client. And just last few words, what tools I have or I can do, so I can start with critical reflection. And the first one is it's good to find a critical friend, somebody who's experienced, and I can talk to him, I can review my practice and discuss some cases if I'm not sure that this was really correct, or I'm having some questions. So it's always good to discuss it with someone. Supervision is a tool which is quite widespread, let's say, in social services or social work. Not so sure that this is the case in care guidance. I think it's really good to have it at least like 2 or 3 times in a year, and you can discuss some complicated cases or clients where you're not really certain about. And it's good to set up some like good practice also within your own organization, because when you're struggling with something, it's good to invite your colleagues to help you to look at it from different examples, and then you can decide which kind of attitude or solution would be good or ethical or not. So I really, really think that this is a very useful tool. Or you can use your creativity, and you can, for example, have a diary and write your diary about your work and your clients. And there are some really interesting examples, I think, written by Siobhan in the publication about how do you call it exactly? This
there's about different methods for reflecting and different tools and resources that you can use. I think the important thing is that that we try and find time and that we address some of these questions, but that we recognise that our work is not just purely just the 2 people in the room, or whatever you happen to be working, or 2 people on screen. there is a whole load of influences that are coming into this relationship, and it's the extent to which you can recognize and acknowledge they're there, and any mitigations that you're able to offer to ensure that you're not allowing your own particular views, values, etc., to influence the support that you're giving to others.
Thanks, Siobhan. So this has been just a little example or insight into the world of critical reflection. And if you're interested in more information, so there's the publication I already mentioned, and here are some links to further reading. And don't worry, I will send you the presentation, so you don't have to write it down because we don't have time for that. You will receive it. Yeah. So thanks everybody for joining this workshop. Thanks for your comments and sharing your stories. And I hope you found it useful. And I think this is really something that should be an important part of our practice, because our aim is to ensure the well-being of our clients. And I think that we are the primary tool that is available in career guidance, and we have to take care for this tool. And career critical reflection is one way to take care of ourselves and think about our practice. So we have a 15-minute break now. Well, I think less, just like 7-minute break. I'm sorry, I was running a bit late. And we start again at 12:15 in the main session, and we shall hear from Nikki Moore about the parental engagement and the research we have carried out. So thanks for joining.
Thank you, everybody, for your contributions.
See you in the main room.